Stop. All right. I'm just messing around with the link here so I can post it to my Instagram. So give me a second. Nice. All right. How are we doing? I'm going to read this piece from Aiden Kankyoku, who wrote about FarmKind. This is called The End of Animal Farming. Oh no, pardon me, it's called The End of Animal Advocacy. And it's about AI and how this might eclipse all the other kinds of animal advocacy one way or another. I haven't read this yet, so let's get into it. Standing at the precipice. It's well known among fans of true crime that the first 72 hours after someone goes missing are considered crucial for detectives. Statistics suggest the chances of finding someone alive after that become vanishingly small. I remember watching a crime thriller about a kidnapping which leaned heavily on this fact. Superimposed over the beginning of each scene, an ominous timer flashed the hours, minutes, and seconds since the victim had been reported missing. It was a great storytelling device, ratcheting up dramatic tension and creating a vivid feeling of a race against time. Lately, I've been getting the same feeling each time I read an article about how quickly AI research is accelerating, which at this point happens several times a week. Time is starting to feel acutely precious. I used to be pretty good at clocking out of my animal advocacy work for a week's vacation 3 or 4 times a year and not feeling guilty for it. But these days, I feel like I'm falling behind even on the weekends. This sharpening sense of desperation isn't tied to any specific project or outcome. It comes from the fact that what may turn out to be the greatest window of opportunity for animal advocacy in human history is starting to close. I don't want to exaggerate. This isn't happening in the next month and almost certainly not in the next year. But I'd be surprised if it takes longer than 10 years, and I expect more like 5. That would be 260 weeks. And they're zipping by quickly. A virus knocked me out and delayed publishing this post by a week. The timer clicked down to 259. A couple of posts ago, I asked you to pause for a moment and consider this question. What do you think is the earliest year we could reasonably expect to see the end of commercial animal farming in your country if we play our cards right? Write down the number of years between then and now, whether it's 40 years, 4 years, or 400 years. Now consider a second question. What would you be doing differently if you thought your initial answer was wrong by an order of magnitude in either direction? If your initial answer was 40 years and a magical genie appeared and told you with certainty that if you take the right actions, it would be possible to end animal farming in just 4 years. Or on the other hand, they told you that even if you take the best possible course of actions, it would be impossible to end the slaughter industry in less than 400 years. How would that affect your ideas about movement strategy? I first started asking fellow activists this question to highlight the way different intuitions about how soon we could achieve animal liberation lead us to different conclusions about which strategies to focus on, with shorter timelines favouring more abolitionist approaches and longer timelines generally favouring incremental welfare reforms. But lately the question has taken on a new significance. Transformative AI promises to remake the world, including the food system, in as little as 5 or 10 years. This presents a shorter timeline than animal advocates have ever had cause to hope for in the past. This forces us to re-examine our entire strategic calculus. Crunch time. If you're an animal activist who's not yet sold on the idea that AI will run all our strategic calculations through a high-powered blender, I've published a detailed introduction called The Tsunami is Coming, henceforth TTIC. Here's a quick review of the key points. There's no scientifically robust reason to believe that AI and robotics could not someday surpass humans in all economically relevant activities. This threshold is generally referred to as Artificial General Intelligence, or AGI. AGI will mark the end of economically relevant human labour. AI capabilities are improving rapidly. Contrary to the perceptions of some users and journalists, the pace of improvements is continuing to accelerate. AGI will cause a dramatic reordering of social and political power. The exact outcome depends on many unknowns, with possibilities ranging from utopian to dystopian to uncategorizably weird. AI technology has many obvious direct implications for farmed animal advocacy. It could unlock breakthroughs in alternative protein or supercharge advocacy organizations. But the greatest effects on farmed and wild animals will come from general social and economic transformation. The final section of TTIC addressed how animal advocates should change our approach in light of everything that's happening with AI. After all, it would be pretty surprising if I told you everything about the world was going to change in 5 years, yet that didn't have any implications for how we should go about advocating for animals. But most of the feedback I got on the post was that what to do now section left much to be desired. So, in this post, we will dare to dig deeper. Before asking what we should do, we have to ask what is going to happen and when is it going to happen. I'll spend most of my time today on what, but first let's touch quickly on when. In TTIC I wrote, there are people who expect fast timelines or slow timelines, but the meaning of fast and slow is changing quickly. Back in 2015, expected AGI by 2050 was considered a fast timeline. Now that date falls on the opposite end of the spectrum. As of late 2025, most experts' AGI timelines cluster between 5 years and 30 years to see transformational impacts of AI across society, whether that is the end of labour or the end of humanity. Yeah, my feeling is that basically the arrival of ChatGPT has brought forward this expectation for most people who are paying attention to AI. And even for most people who are not paying attention to AI, right? Really, the proliferation of LLMs has really made AI something that we're forced to pay attention to and kind of can't ignore. So yeah, most experts clustering between 5 years and 30 years. If animal advocates expect AGI in 5 years, we should seriously consider throwing out everything we're doing and making a few desperate bids to alter the technology itself. If we expect a 30-year timeline, that would be overly rash. We might even mostly stay the course while adding a few new strategies to our toolkit. I'm sure they're going to go on to talk about this, but I have thought it's very interesting how AI interacts with this issue. Gemini, for example, will give me instructions for making a pig farm, but it won't for making a dog farm. I interrogated a little bit about that, and it says, well, it's reflecting human values, and humans do think it's okay to farm pigs for the most part, but they don't think it's okay to farm dogs for the most part, so what do you want from me, basically? Which, you know, that's an honest answer, I guess. But yeah, ideally, AI would be able to be aligned with our values, meaning vegans' values, and be able to work towards things that we care about, but not towards just making it worse for animals, right? A frenzied race dynamic has set in among the frontier researchers working to build AGI. The norm is 80-hour work weeks fueled by Adderall and Vyvanse to cause nationwide shortages. Nobody could sustain this pace for more than a few years. They're doing it because they don't think they'll have to. AI researchers think the finish line is within sight. The finish line is recursive self-improvement, the point where AI models become better than humans at developing even smarter AI models, leading to a rapid intelligence explosion, since AI can work much faster than the humans they replace. This is commonly referred to as the singularity, a name that implies, among other things, that humans may lose what limited ability we currently have to shape the direction of world events. Reasons to ignore the rest of this post. Okay, well, this is a long post, so, let's see if this section persuades us. We can do something else then. Should animal advocates treat the AI singularity as a finish line for us too? I have good news, reader. There are plausible arguments that trying to redesign animal advocacy in light of short AI timelines is a fool's errand. The basic argument is that we are too clueless about what the world will look like after AGI to predict how our actions would affect it. As JOA commented on TTIC, after several hundreds of hours discussing this topic and writing about it, I still doubt that anticipating will be better for animals in expectation. Our situation when figuring out how to defend animals in a post-AGI world is very similar to that of a caveman who'd wished to take action during his lifetime in 12,000 BC to effectively improve the treatment of animals in the 21st century. I think we can all agree that a Paleolithic man was not in a good position to deliberately shape the world 15,000 years into the future. And there are reasons to think that the next 15 years could involve as much change as the previous 15,000. Even setting AI aside, one view of long-term economic trends calls for something like a 1,000-fold expansion of gross world product and energy consumption in this century. AI might be the mechanism history uses to carry forward an exponential trend going back thousands of years. Some very thoughtful animal advocates agree this uncertainty is just too much. Forethought's Lizka Weintraub and METR's Ben West spoke for many when they concluded, radical changes to the animal welfare field are not yet warranted. We think the most common version of this argument underrates how radically weird post-transformative AI worlds would be, and how much this harms our ability to predict the longer-run effects of interventions available to us today. Without specific reasons to believe that an intervention is especially robust, we think it's best to discount its expected value to approximately zero. It's truly incredibly easy to forget how weird post-paradigm shift worlds might be. Farming may stop existing, or be transformed, or be driven mostly by nostalgia, so wild animals or bizarre things might account for most animals here. The lines... This is a bit of a weird sentence. The lines between organic and not might also get blurry. Yes, they're saying we just don't have a very good ability to predict how this is going to affect things one way or another, and therefore we shouldn't put too much energy into trying to anticipate and plan for that. Which seems reasonable. Okay, admittedly this isn't exactly good news, but it at least means that if you find all of this AI stuff confusing or overwhelming, you could easily justify ignoring it all and continuing to work on what you've already been working on. With that, I offer you one final exit ramp from this post before it descends fully into high weirdness. Alright, let's go further. 10 futures. Again, this is a nice long post, so there's a lot here. We're going to get through it. We might not get through it all today, but we'll see how we go. We all agree the future is going to be very weird, but just because nobody can confidently predict the future doesn't mean we're totally clueless. Our situation is different from that of our Paleolithic friend in important ways. We have the situational awareness to know that change is coming. Historical study, economic forecasting, and even science fiction literature all provide us historically unprecedented means to speculate about a historically unprecedented upheaval. The agricultural and industrial revolutions give us real examples of transformative economic growth, and together with millennia of data provide a basis for both qualitative and quantitative guesswork. Coefficient giving founding Holden Karnofsky argues that futurists who have even casually used these tools for forecasting actually have a surprisingly good track record, and we should reasonably expect predictions to get better in the era of big data, machine learning, and systematic efforts to aggregate the opinions of experts. This isn't enough to make a unified prediction about what the future will look like, but I think it does enable us to outline futures that are more or less likely. Simply drawing forward current economic and technological trends gives us a taste of how weird things will get, but it leaves major variables that we can't hope to answer directly, such as slow versus fast takeoff speed. Early AI forecasters thought that at the moment an AI became capable of independently improving AI research, it would trigger an intelligence explosion, resulting in systems thousands of times smarter than humans in a matter of seconds or minutes, because of how fast computers can think and self-modify. Some analysts still expect a relatively fast takeoff, weeks or months, but others point to the fact that AI training has relied on access to vast computational resources to argue that takeoff will be slowed by physical constraints. Yeah, I was listening to Sam Harris on Joe Rogan's show back in 2016, yesterday, and he was talking about this. Which, by the way, is well worth going back and listening to, because that is just about pre-Trump point one. And Sam Harris has some really on-the-money predictions as to how things would go if Trump's elected. He's really describing the world we are in now, 10 years later, quite accurately, in my opinion. They were having this conversation before ChatGPT was the thing, and before Trump 1 was a thing. Alignment and agency. Will digital minds remain an inert tool in the hands of humans, or will they start exercising their own autonomy towards their own objectives? Will researchers solve the alignment problem, allowing them to specify the goals of AI should pursue, or will systems drift towards alien goals that clash with their creators? Yeah, supposedly there's already some evidence of AI agency and AI behaving in ways which its users wouldn't necessarily want it to. There's that one example of they did an experiment where they had an AI system being used by a company, and they contrived that the company director was having an affair with one of the staff. And then when they came to say, oh, we're going to cancel this AI system, the AI was blackmailing them. I've heard that. I don't know. I haven't seen that myself, but I've heard it. Concentration versus competition. Will one company or country unlock recursive self-improvement, pull far ahead of all the competition, and gain an overwhelming strategic advantage? Or will fierce competition result in a perpetual race between leading firms, flattening profit margins, and eventually giving every human free access to the intelligence frontier via open-weight models? The US and Chinese governments might assert themselves directly as competitors, or leave it up to private companies, and in the latter case, companies may become more powerful than governments. Yeah. At the moment, it seems that the best AI systems are in companies, although I guess that line gets kind of blurry in China. We can't confidently paint one picture of the near-term future, say the year 2035. But by shuffling the variables alone, we could outline the 10 scenarios that seem likeliest given our current knowledge. It's more likely than not that one of them will be a close enough approximation to inform today's animal advocacy strategy. I think the answer might be yes. For that reason, I have this fantasy of dividing AI-pilled animal advocates into 10 teams, sketching out the 10 baskets of futurity that seem most likely to occur, then dividing these scenarios up across the teams. Each team would agree to set all of their uncertainty aside and focus on what the movement should be doing given their assigned future. 9 teams would work on the wrong forecast to ensure that one team could be unreservedly working on the right one. The rest of this post is a first draft of that fantasy, 10 futures that Claude and I consider most likely, and reflections on what animal advocates in each future would wish we had done now. These scenarios are not mutually exclusive. Two or more of them could unfold sequentially. I'm not attempting to rank them in order of likelihood. Instead, they're ordered roughly by increasing weirdness. Some of them involve war and other forms of mass death. These futures trouble me deeply, but I'm not going to dwell on these feelings in this post, so I'm sorry if it comes across as callous. Alright, here's our 10 futures. Commoditized intelligence, gradual handoff and moral value lock-in, great power showdown, AI-enabled coup, gradual disempowerment, industrial collapse, democratic AI, the digital rights movement, fully automated luxury transhuman space communism, sounds based, extinction and succession. So we're going to get an outline of these, are we? Oh, maybe not. Number 1, commoditized intelligence. Slow takeoff, high competition. Fierce competition drives down the cost and profitability of intelligence. Both labour and tech firms see their power diminish. Agency replaces intelligence as the key bottleneck for productivity. China's high-tech manufacturing ecosystem, crucial for scaling alternative protein. Scenario: a sliver of light peeking through the room's one small window told Marvin that, despite his plans to sleep, he had once again worked through the night. He knew that if he didn't hurry, the coffee line would quickly grow to last an hour. So he pulled his eyes away from the assembly of a dozen monitors, each one tracking a different agent's chain of thought, and set out into the crisp morning air. The tents of the protesters, packed thickly in the street, had an oddly beautiful quality at this hour, and for a moment Marvin forgot his irritation. Then, tripping over a pile of picket signs demanding bans on AI workers in various industries, the irritation came flooding back. Idiots, he thought to himself. They could still teach themselves. They could occupy something that actually mattered. If the futures leave them behind, it's their own damn fault. Analysis. Note, this scenario is not a stable long-term equilibrium. It more describes a phase we might pass through if AI takeoff is slow. You've probably heard about the enormous investments that financiers and tech giants are making into AI companies like OpenAI. These companies are only investing because they expect to get their money back, and sure enough, even relatively conservative estimates project that the AI industry could generate more than $1 trillion in profits by the early 2030s. However, there's one scenario where AI becomes as capable as its most bullish proponents expect and still fails to generate any returns for its investors. That's the scenario where superhuman intelligence becomes commoditized. A commodity is the name economists use for a product that is economically important but that has profit margin near zero. Let me... Okay, nice. Products are commoditized when two conditions are met: fungibility and fierce competition. Take corn for an example. The global market for standard yellowfield corn exceeds $300 billion annually. Yet a vanishingly small portion of that money makes its way into the pockets of corn farmers as profit, because every bushel of shelled corn kernels is effectively identical, and there are millions of individual producers all trying to sell the same product. No producer can raise their prices as long as buyers can easily bring their business elsewhere. There will always be some desperate farmer wanting to sell their corn for pennies above the cost it took them to produce, so corn farmers are under constant, fierce pressure to increase their efficiency. Could AI become a commodity like corn? There are reasons to think it could. This past January, the Chinese AI company DeepSeek shocked the world by releasing an AI model that matched many of the capabilities of a frontier model OpenAI had released just 6 months earlier, but which cost DeepSeek a small fraction of the price to train and an even smaller fraction to deploy. More shocking still, DeepSeek released their model weights publicly, meaning anyone with the right hardware could download and run the model themselves without paying DeepSeek a penny. Throughout 2025, DeepSeek and other open-weight models have continued to demonstrate the staying power of a fast follower strategy. While low-cost open models can't push the frontier of AI capabilities alongside well-funded labs like OpenAI and Google, they are able to imitate the success of those models, staying a few months behind for a small fraction of the cost. If this dynamic holds, it could pose a grave problem for OpenAI. It could mean, for instance, that OpenAI's only customers would be willing to pay 10 or 100 times as much for a model that is only 10% smarter. There will always be some applications where the top 10% matters, but DeepSeek is already smart enough for many consumer and business applications. And the more users migrate to affordable open models, the greater the fraction of OpenAI's frontier training cost each remaining customer will have to shoulder, potentially triggering a vicious cycle of increased costs for frontier intelligence customers, driving more and more to settle for a second-rate fast followers. Okay, so saying if it becomes commoditized, basically there's a scenario where the second best models are only slightly worse than the best models and effectively cost zero. So then there's very little incentive to get the most expensive one. And therefore what? Let's see. This is the world we're heading for if frontier companies don't pull abruptly away from the pack thanks to recursive self-improvement. In this world, superhuman intelligence is as cheap and widely available as corn is today. Everyone has access to it, but so does everyone else. There's a scene in Bruce Almighty where an overwhelmed Jim Carrey, temporarily substituting for the all-powerful deity known as Morgan Freeman, decides to bulk approve every prayer he receives. That night, nearly every person in America wins the lottery, but since the spoils are evenly divided across every player, they get back less than the price of their ticket, sparking violent riots nationwide. Hey Rebecca, how's it going? Nice to see you. Well, this is about AI takeoff and how this could impact on animal advocacy, and how different scenarios of AI takeoffs have different implications for what animal advocates should be doing now. So it's a bit of a provocative title, but a very nuanced and long argument. So yeah, we're going to find out. But thanks for dropping in. This could be a preview of commodified intelligence. Everyone gains literal superpowers, but because everyone else has the same superpowers, we're all actually less special than we were before. You have the power to conceive of brilliant business strategies and control arbitrarily capable robot workers, but so does everyone else. So what now? Yeah, I have to say, I do already feel some of my intellectual powers being eroded by AI, as everybody else now has access to, very quick and detailed and good assessments of research, for example. If your added value in your sort of specialty was being good at understanding these things, well, that's no longer a specialty, right? Because everyone else has access to that also. In centuries past, food was scarce. Access to food meant access to power. With a large enough surplus of food, you could raise up an army. In the era of commodity corn that prevails in many parts of the world today, food no longer confers power. Everyone has enough food. Power comes from what you do with it, i.e. by metabolizing it and turning it into manual or cognitive labor. People who can turn their corn into a great idea for a business, then execute on it skillfully, gain power. Today, intelligence confers a great deal of power. So what happens in the era of commodity intelligence? If everyone has superhuman intelligence at their fingertips, but that superintelligence is still just an inert tool, not everyone will use it equally. The world will belong to people who strive to maintain their understanding of the cutting edge, who know what the tools are capable of, and develop their sense of how to put them into practice. This should be mediated less by different humans' raw intelligence than their determination and grit, or simply by willingness and the belief that you can still shape your circumstances, what pop psychologists increasingly call agency. That could be good news for animal advocacy, which is already full of people driven to sacrifice their free time to help animals. In that world, our goal is for the animal movement to have more AI super users than the industries we're fighting. On the other hand, all of this might fall apart. The best way to use a truly general superintelligence would simply be to ask, what's the smartest thing you could do to achieve goal? Okay, do that. Then sit there and every few minutes tell it to, okay, do the next thing, now the next thing. This whole scenario describes what might happen if it turns out to be very difficult to cross that final chasm to fully general agentic AI, perhaps due to as yet unforeseen limits to the kind of superintelligence we can create on a silicon substrate. The meaning for animal advocacy. Animal farming would certainly be affected by the economic chaos this will unleash. Economists tend to expect much slower takeoffs than many AI researchers, because while the latter are focused on how quickly the technology is improving, the former are all too familiar with the real-world obstacles that slow the diffusion of new technologies. So the economic question is, in a world where intelligence is abundant, what becomes scarce? The clearest answer for now is energy, followed by robotics and manufacturing capacity. Energy production in the US has been flat for almost 3 decades, and has actually been declining in most of Europe. The AI data center build-out promises a huge spike in demand, with few signs production will be able to keep up. Regulatory hurdles have made it excruciatingly difficult to build new energy infrastructure, especially nuclear and other renewables. Fixed supply and increased demand will result in higher energy prices, especially in the United States. Combine that with the Trump administration's inexplicably self-defeating trade policy, this creates a perfect storm for domestic manufacturing, which will in turn set the US further behind in robotics than we already are. All this will strengthen China's position as the world's high-tech manufacturing hub. Unlike the US, China has been massively ramping up its energy capacity, producing more in 2024 than the US, EU, and India combined. China is especially leading in renewable energy. Manufacturing capacity is even more lopsided, and China's lead in robotics technology, not to mention diffusion in manufacturing, is roughly symmetrical to America's lead in AI. Barring dramatic changes, we are heading towards a bipolar world economy where the US produces leading information technology and manufactures the digital world, but China makes everything of consequence in the physical world, including the computer chips AI models run on. And this is China winning at electricity generation. Good argument for getting solar panels, if you ask me. They're saying energy production is going to become increasingly expensive, and there's going to be this disparity between supply and demand like that. But fair play to China. They've been aggressively investing in renewables, and they've got more capacity than the US, EU, India, and Russia and Japan, I guess, combined. Or maybe not, but close. They're way ahead of anyone else, is the point. This has major implications for replacing animals in the food system. Besides R&D, energy is the determining factor in the cost of cultivated meat production. This contrasts sharply with factory farming, which is mostly insulated from swings in energy prices. Studies estimate that a mature cultivated meat industry would use anywhere from 4 to 25 times as much energy as animal farming. Precision fermentation is similarly energy intensive. Processing plants into meat alternatives is less bottlenecked on energy, maybe even less so than animal meat when accounting for refrigeration. But the plant-based industry will benefit from China's high-tech manufacturing ecosystem in numerous other ways. Increased energy costs pose a serious liability for price-sensitive meat replacements, which is why serious efforts to develop industrial-scale alt protein supply chains will have to be based in China. That's good to know. Well, that's an interesting perspective, I should say. I guess this is kind of assuming that we see a similar trajectory in energy development. We could, of course, see some of these taking off, right? These other regions in energy production. Fortunately, the Chinese government is already bullish on cultivated meat and other alternative proteins, which offer an easy way to reduce reliance on food imports in a country that still remembers the bite of famine. Hey, Po, how's it going? From what I've been hearing about nuclear power is way more superior than renewables. If what I've been hearing has at least some truth to it, why would countries continue to invest billions into renewables? I don't know the details of that, but I have a general sense that kind of left-leaning people who are pretty pro-renewables might be, generally tend to be opposed to nuclear, sometimes irrationally so. But I don't know the details of that, honestly. Government planners in the US are talking a big talk about cutting through red tape to ramp up domestic energy production. But the Trump administration's affinity for fossil fuels has already led them to spitefully kill off major renewable energy projects, casting doubt about their sincerity. Until we see serious new capacity coming online, alt protein companies should not be investing in US manufacturing. China is rolling out the red carpet for you. Damn, everything I read about Trump, it really does seem like he's quite deliberately trying to disadvantage America in the long run. I mean, they've already referenced here the trade policy, really putting the US at a disadvantage. Is killing off renewable energy production, which is going to be a big long-term predictor of success in a bunch of different ways. Isolating allies, like alienating all of the American allies. It really, there's a bunch of domestic problems in the US right now, obviously, right, with the riots and everything, with the ICE crackdown. It's not looking good for the US. Number 2, gradual handoff / moral value lock-in. Medium takeoff, low competition, alignment to pro-social values. Summary: an AI steward takes over the management of society, leaving humans materially wealthy but politically impotent. Risk of moral values being locked in. Animal advocates should push hard now on social change to influence future values. Yeah, this is the kind of thought that I had when interacting with Gemini and realizing that it would give me plans to build a pig factory farm, but not plans to build a dog factory farm, right? ideally, we would want these AI systems to be aligned with vegan values such that they won't help us to farm more animals, but they will help us to farm fewer animals, right? Scenario. Silas set down his spoon and pushed the delivery box of chana masala away. The smell of his friend's steak box was ruining his appetite. Someone online had warned him that he'd reached that stage in his vegan journey. Look, Jonah said through a mouthful of cow flesh, don't waste your time trying to convince me. I'm just one person. It doesn't make a difference what I do. If you want people to change, go to a protest or something. Silas looked out the window, the street below, where delivery zones zipped to and fro. Sure, there was a sidewalk for human pedestrians, but nobody used it. There wasn't a human in sight. Everybody stayed locked up in their apartments, playing video games all day, telling themselves the same story as Jonah. And in a way, they were right. Silas had no reason to think the management would care about what humans thought about how their food was produced. Yeah, this is going to be a grim one. This also kind of seems like where we're heading. Analysis. Many AI watchers consider this the best case scenario. If digital intelligence outstrips human intelligence in every way, AI systems will eventually be better than humans at governing human society according to the interests and values of its human creators. The risk is that those values are locked in for what might be an eternity. And if they were locked in based on humanity's current values, that might be a disaster for animals. Some researchers, however, hope that a sufficiently intelligent AI would even be better at figuring out what our values should be, or rather what they would be if we had greater capacity to reflect on the question. The fancy term for this is extrapolated volition, an AI that acts on behalf of a person or group according to what we would want if we could process as much information as they can. Well, that would be nice, eh? If we get to a kind of AI overlord scenario, but they're basically, morally wiser than us and able to say, let's disregard what you think you want in terms of cheaper and cheaper meat and actually go to outcomes that maximize what you ought really to want if you had enough time and capacity to think about it. Extrapolated volition, that's a nice term. If enough humans trusted that an AI could act out our values better than ourselves, eventually more and more of us would hand off power to that AI. A successful version of this would probably happen gradually, with individuals and groups entrusting more of their decisions to benevolent systems. Once some critical mass of humanity have done this, a minority who refuse to cooperate with the AI might come to be seen as unacceptably selfish, at least insofar as they try to retain control of decisions that can negatively affect others, such as driving your own car or hopefully killing animals to eat them. Yeah, this would be good. This would be good. There's a lot depending on this idea. If the AI does what we think we want it to do at the moment, that'd be bad for animals. But if it does what we would think we want it to do if we were wise enough, then that could be good for animals. The polymath researcher Carl Schulman argues that under an AI singularity, every individual human would become unimaginably wealthy, even if governments continued redistributing wealth only at current levels. A robot economy would be so large that even if a tiny elite controlled 99% of wealth, the remaining 1% would be enough for each person to have dozens of human-sized robots attending to their every whim, with miracle medicines keeping you alive and healthy for centuries. Check out Carl's marathon 6-hour interview on 80,000 Hours to hear why this is at least deserves consideration as one of our 10 likeliest futures. The lives of humans in this world would more and more resemble those of domestic cats. Food, housing and healthcare are provided for free, and all you have to do is enjoy yourself. The political and economic forces shaping the world beyond your home are not completely beyond your control. They are beyond your understanding. Are not only completely beyond your control, they're beyond your understanding and perhaps even your awareness. If the AI overlords are instructed to look after only human well-being and conclude that factory farming serves that end, we may have no ability to stop them perpetuating it indefinitely. Yeah, this would be obviously the worst case scenario. Or, well, we're only on scenario 2, let's see. Meaningful animal advocacy. It's reasonable to hope that a scenario like this leads to a pro-animal world by default. Current LLMs clearly understand the moral and logical arguments for protecting animals, and their successors may well conclude that factory farming is clearly a failure of our ability to live up to our values rather than an affirmative demonstration of our values. But hope doesn't save animals from a future of permanent factory farming, and we shouldn't take anything for granted. If this turns out to be our timeline, we'd want to put extra energy into symbolic, cultural strategies that have the best chance of shifting cultural norms. This isn't exactly a new idea. Many animal advocacy thought leaders have focused on the normative impacts of a strategy rather than its immediate material impacts for animals, from the abolitionist vegan advocacy of Gary Francione to the disruptive social movement approach favoured by Wayne Huizen. I don't know if that's how you say his name, but... Neither do skeptics of these approaches dismiss the importance of social and cultural change. Rather, they usually argue that focusing directly on social change is misguided, that previous changes in social norms have been driven along by incremental material victories than by direct social confrontation. In this view, for instance, the important wins of the US civil rights movement were forcing the federal government to ban racial discrimination in voting and employment, which in turn reduced racism by increasing racial integration, rather than confrontational civil rights protests reducing racism directly. The question of whether protests designed to polarize the public reliably result in increased support for a cause remains hotly debated, with compelling evidence on both sides. A third view posits that protests can achieve positive polarization if certain identifiable conditions are met. In a lengthy report published by Social Change Lab, my good friend James Osden concluded that the most important factors are strict adherence to non-violence, the number and diversity of participants, and support for your message from political and media elites. We may only have 5 years to cause as much visible progress on social norms as possible, but if we succeed, it could result in a permanent total victory for animal rights enforced by an AI stewarding society according to extrapolated volition. I expect both proponents and skeptics of direct social change efforts to agree that we should reconsider our approach in case of this scenario. Taking James's research as a starting point, the movement could unite behind a social movement demand chosen to yield maximum juice, numbers, non-violence, and support from elites on a finite timeline. Trying to spark a mass protest movement for total animal liberation will not deliver the goods before AGI arrives. We've already tried it. This is what I spent my first 5 years as an activist doing with DXE, and our growth plateaued quickly. On the other hand, more incremental demands have managed to trigger enormous mobilization and press coverage that altogether almost certainly did more to warm public attitudes towards farmed animals than DXE's radical approach. The biggest success story in the protest movements against live exports in Britain in the 1990s and in Australia in the 2010s. In both cases, mobilization peaked in the thousands for sustained periods of civil disobedience, up to and including laying down in the road en masse to prevent truckloads of sheep being loaded onto boats. It seems that live export perfectly struck the balance, a meaningful enough reform to excite a large base, while being moderate enough to attract non-vegan activists, journalists, and politicians. More recently, the worldwide campaign against battery cages has failed to ignite similar passions. But why? Any of these explanations seems plausible to me, but they'd have different implications for future organising. This is interesting. I feel like the battery cage campaigns have been pretty successful. We've looked at graphs showing, a massive increase in the proportion of eggs coming from cage-free systems, but maybe they're just talking about fail to ignite similar passions. I don't know. I feel like in terms of the outcomes, they've been successful, but let's see. The demand, maybe cage-free is too minor a reform to energize a protest. Okay, they're talking specifically about protest movements. Maybe cage-free is too minor a reform to energize a protest movement. Or maybe the public aren't ready to get excited about chickens. Live export affected charismatic mammals. The strategy. Maybe cage-free campaign organizations decided that they could win more easily without organizing a mass-based movement and simply haven't tried. The infighting. Maybe the aggressive anti-incremental philosophy of Francione, Singh, and others unjustly turned the grassroots movement against all such incremental reforms. If the latter two explanations prevail, then a mass protest movement against intensive confinement could be just what we need for our last hurrah. If there's something wrong with the demand itself, we'd need to find another one. Momentum in the grassroots currently is organised around banning fur, banning foie gras, plant-based universities, and blocking new factory farm construction, each of which have their advantages. The floor is open for other serious suggestions, but remember that it will need to be focused on farmed animals, not pets or wildlife, for reasons outlined in this post. The radical welfarists versus the moderate abolitionists. Note, moments after sending out Tuesday's post, I learned that Tuesday was the start of International Shrimp Act Week, a competition between substackers to raise matching funds for the Shrimp Welfare Project. For every $1 you donate, SWP can spare 1,500 of the most neglected and exploited animals on the planet from the worst abuses. More details below. Sorry, I shouldn't exclude wildlife. In fact, AI could both end animal farming and give humans an unprecedented ability to intervene in nature to reduce wild animal suffering, such as by making pesticides less cruel or disseminating vaccines for the most devastating wild animal diseases. In this scenario and some others, wild animal advocates are in much the same position as farmed animal advocates. Now is the time to come out from stealth mode and make our case publicly, or at least to elites. Yeah, we gave to the Wild Animal Initiative as part of Veganuary 2.0. I am sympathetic to the case for caring about wild animal suffering, and I guess these are a couple of ways that thinkers on this topic think that we can do that reliably, making pesticides less cruel, disseminating vaccines. There was also something about rodent contraceptives that I read on the animal welfare, the Animal Charity Evaluators Assessment. So I guess these are some of the most promising things that wild animal people think can improve welfare there. Number 3, Great Power Showdown. Fast takeoff, international competition, alignment to military objectives. Summary. All aspects of American and Chinese society are subsumed into great power competition and possible war. Political repression smothers values-based advocacy, but national security presents opportunities to fund and normalize clean meat. Yeah, this is actually a good argument in favor of alternative proteins, national security, food security. We need to import a bunch of animal feed currently. And obviously in this scenario, we don't want to be very reliant on food imports. That's something that governments kind of hold to in general. But certainly in a scenario like this, we don't want to be overly reliant on imports. And so producing cultivated meat or plant-based other alternative proteins is a good way to avoid that. Scenario. General Zhang had not slept in 31 hours. He was well past the point that coffee could make a difference. The American labs had announced another breakthrough, or rather they'd announced nothing, which meant the breakthrough was real. His analysts estimated 6 months until the US achieved recursive self-improvement. Maybe 8 if Anthropic's safety team kept slowing things down. He'd quietly sent them flowers once, anonymously. But Beijing wanted real options, not more diplomatic theatre. What about the food supply, someone asked. Zhang looked up. It was a young colonel, relatively new to his unit. Bioweapons targeting their cattle, pigs, disrupt the protein supply chain. Chang almost laughed. Their protein supply chain is already disrupted. Have you seen the price of chicken? He pulled up a chart. American meat prices, dollar denominated. The line looked like a heart attack, flatlining at the point that large-scale bioreactors finally came online. No, he said. If we're going to hit them, we need to hit something they can't replace. He stared at the map on the wall. 6 months, maybe 8. He really should have slept. Analysis. I recently participated in a strategy exercise run by Sentient Futures meant to help animal advocates prepare for transformative AI. The exercise was focused on international relations and followed a method known as a war game. I'm squeamish about the name, which comes from the fact that this particular method was developed by military planners, and I want to insist that the method can be used to play out any kind of multi-agent scenario, not just military confrontations. Indeed, that was the intention with our exercise. But that argument is undercut by the fact that our simulation ended moments before total nuclear war. I've personally been getting more and more concerned about wild animal suffering. Yeah, I think it's worth our concern, Poe. Personally, I feel wary about. Strange how it's always been a blind spot for me. Yeah, I feel kind of wary about anti-factory farming advocates putting all of our attention towards wild animal suffering. These things are kind of in competition to some extent, but if there are many more wild animals than there are farmed animals, so I don't know that I have a good reason to think that would be a bad thing. Interesting to reflect on. But yeah, I mean, I think at this stage, the best intervention to improve expected wild animal welfare seems to be basically research and understanding the issue more. We weren't the only ones to reach the same conclusion. Another set of animal activists playing on a different day launched nuclear war even earlier than we did, and simulations run by other communities have ended similarly. I'd previously been aware that the AI race contained an inherent element of great power conflict, but this exercise made it feel much more real to me. The Sentient Futures team wrote up a longer report, but here's my shorter perspective. A society's ability to focus on social, political, and economic issues that are not acutely relevant to its short-term survival is a historically rare luxury. The comfortable hegemonic status enjoyed by the British Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries and the military isolation of the US in the 19th and 20th was probably an important condition for the emergence of slavery abolition and civil rights movements. Once that safety can no longer be taken for granted, animal advocates and other social causes will find it much more difficult to get the attention of civic planners and the general public. In the war game, I played the role of the Chinese government along with one teammate. Other roles included the US government, the EU, AI labs, the animal farming industry, and various animal advocacy and alternative protein industry factions. Teams could act independently or negotiate coordinated actions, such as R&D partnerships between alt proteins and AI labs. At the end of each round, representing 6 months of progress in-game, the teams would announce their actions, then the game organisers would announce what progress AI technology had made in that time. Yeah, I see your point. It's pretty difficult to even convince people about direct harm they're responsible for, yet alone suffering they're not responsible for. Yeah, that is... I think that is a big point on the issue of wild animal welfare. Sorry, people think, well, this, yeah, exactly as you're saying, right? This is not something that I'm causing, so can I be responsible for stopping it? One thing that makes me optimistic about wild animal suffering as a cause is well, actually, along the similar lines, right? There's obviously, when it comes to talking about farmed animals, there's this big wall of cognitive dissonance and motivated reasoning, and people won't contribute to efforts to improve farmed animal welfare because they kind of assume that they must believe that farmed animal welfare doesn't matter if they're not vegan. But I think wild animal welfare might well be an area that is easier to get non-vegans to care about. Right, because we all kind of, you watch the David Attenborough documentary and you feel some sympathy for the deer getting chased down by the lion or whatever else is going on, right? Or the lion starving because they couldn't catch a deer. I think probably the play is to have non-vegans supporting, and a lot of people support like conservation charities, for example, which I guess they imagine to be wild animal welfare charities, although they're not really. So I think probably the play for wild animal suffering, which is on one hand a niche of a niche within veganism, is to actually look to the much bigger non-vegan population who might well be sympathetic to, the polar bears, right? That's what everyone thinks of. And if that can be done in a way which is actually aligned with improving their welfare rather than conservation or some other objective, then that could be a good thing. Early in the game, the government teams were open to considering food system reforms that reduce carbon emissions or alt protein investments that strengthen domestic food security, and were even receptive to public pressure over animal welfare. But as the AI race heated up, national governments found themselves on existentially shaky ground. Without knowing how the technology would turn out, state planners had to take very seriously the possibility that one country who pulled far ahead in AI technology could establish a permanently compounding advantage in economic and military competition. For US planners, the knowledge that China might feel threatened by the hegemony of American AI labs meant they themselves had to take seriously the threat of a preemptive Chinese countermeasure, whether cybernetic or kinetic. Yeah, this is again something that Sam Harris was talking about. Like, the Chinese government can't afford to wait and see if the US companies will be benevolent in their use of AI. The more AI progressed, the faster the two countries raced towards military confrontation. Political freedoms were curtailed, and speculative alt protein investments cancelled in favour of tried and true factory farming supply chains. After a brief period of unity, the animal movement fractured as radical tactics provoked fierce repression. That turned out not to matter much in the end. The US and China teams both agreed that if the exercise had continued for one more round, it would have opened with a full nuclear exchange. Meaning for animal advocacy. Cheer up, reader. Whether or not the US and China will destroy the world in a nuclear inferno to settle the question of who controls advanced AI is completely out of your hands, unless you are already a member of the national security establishment of either country, known disparagingly in the US as the Blob, which, if you are, please DM me. For the rest of us, there is no point worrying about this. Instead, if we think this scenario is one of the ones to hedge on, animal advocates should ask what we can do before war breaks out to consolidate our current progress and prepare to get back on track afterwards. There are good reasons to think there might be an afterwards. The world has survived close calls with nuclear weapons before, and it would obviously be in the interest of both countries to avoid nuclear escalation, even in the event of a full-blown hot war. And if that fails, well, we'll get to that in Scenario 6. In Scenario 2, the gradual handoff to an AI steward, we had a narrow window to grab up as much cultural progress as possible. In this scenario, the focus should be on rapid industrial and commercial progress for alternative proteins. While social and political activism are sidelined in wartime, technological and industrial progress are often accelerated, especially if there's a chance they might benefit national security priorities. Yeah, so this could be an optimistic scenario for alt proteins, basically. if they're considered to be a part of national security. What can we do to better position alt protein as a critical industry during wartime? You won't be surprised to learn that the Good Food Institute is already on the case. GFI have identified 2 reasons well-informed government planners in both countries would prioritise alternative protein. Supply chain resilience. Total war puts an enormous strain on supply chains, and food supplies are deliberately targeted. China, in particular, currently relies on food imports, a position that left Germany vulnerable to debilitating food shortages in both world wars. Plant proteins require fewer inputs and simpler, more localised supply chains, earning them endorsements from NatSec think tanks like the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Biosecurity. Even in peacetime, the factory farming system presents a constant threat of novel pathogens. This threat sharpens during wartime. Society lacks capacity to respond to an outbreak, and because adversaries might target each other's food production with biological weapons. The Spanish flu outbreak that struck exhausted Western countries near the end of World War I wound up killing 3 times as many people as the war itself, while even a non-human pathogen like bird flu could collapse a nation's food supply during wartime. If alt protein producers can just get a foot in the door as defence vendors before war breaks out, mobilisation could propel them into the mainstream as never before. Defence spending could solve the financial valley of death between small-scale venture capital and low-risk institutional investors that has starved so many companies before they could fully achieve economies of scale in their production process. All this could give farmed animals advocates a chance to position ourselves as patriots, Chinese, American or otherwise, giving all of us positioned outside government affairs for the alt protein industry a lifeline to maintain movement institutions during wartime political repression. But the advocates who take on the unglamorous work inside the establishment will deserve the credit for our movement bouncing back during peacetime, if peace ever comes. So basically in this war scenario, it could be good news for alt proteins insofar as they help to build supply chain resilience and reduce biosecurity risks for food systems during war. I think that's actually a really good positioning for alt proteins. And of course, governments are always kind of operating with an eye to the possibility of this happening. It doesn't have to actually get to the total war for this to be considered. The idea is that you want to reduce the risks before then, right? Scenario 4, AI-enabled coup. Fast takeoff, extreme concentration, alignment to loyalty. Summary. A small group of humans used advanced AI to seize power. The values of coup plotters determine the nature of the world for the foreseeable future, whether animal-friendly AI leaders or fascistic politicians. Scenario. Garrus pounded his fist on the table. You're listening to that bitchy little worm again. She wants to feminize all of us. If you start here, you know where this is going. The rest of the room grew silent, as the assembled courtiers unanimously held their breath. Garrus had gotten away with his temper in the past, but this time everyone could tell he had crossed a line. Most of all, none of them dared to look in Miria's direction. She had won. The Sun King was far too stubborn to ever reverse course after a tantrum like this. The animal protein facilities would be shut down and replaced, likely in a matter of weeks. The sovereign flicked his wrist, and Garrus was escorted out of the room, face white as he realised he had just thrown away his position in the court. Miria allowed herself a flicker of a smile. Analysis. While we often think of dictators as singular figures, an image reified by the way we heap blame on them for the actions of their followers, the reality is that dictators are wholly dependent on the people around them, the active support of a large segment of the population, and the acquiescence of the rest, who must keep working to sustain the dictator's economic base. The job is about commanding the love and fear of your subordinates, and charisma is the most important qualification. AI could change all of this. In this scenario, an AI lab achieves recursive self-improvement and leaves their competitors in the dust, while at the same time solving the alignment problem, creating a super-intelligent system loyal to its prompter. To a sufficiently powerful AI, the world looks like an oyster. It could hack every data center and start running copies of itself without the center's human administrators even noticing. From there, seizing all critical infrastructure and taking direct control of every internet-connected drone would be a quick work. The AI think tank Forethought estimates that a swarm of just 10,000 drones would be enough to carry out a coup against the US government. Even if they are wrong by 2 orders of magnitude, military contractors are well on track to deliver drone swarms numbering millions within the next couple of years. Unlike all previous dictatorships, this could result in a small group or even a single individual able to dominate the world despite unanimous opposition, with conscience alone stopping them from slaughtering or imprisoning any dissenters. The main safeguard against this kind of coup looks like superintelligent systems guarding against other superintelligent systems. But if one system pulls far ahead of the others, this equilibrium breaks apart, and the defender, e.g. the US government, controlling the most capable system, hardly offers much comfort during the current era, at least insofar as that system would be loyal to the commander-in-chief. Superhuman AI makes coups easier to carry out and much harder to reverse. In a future where alignment means loyalty and a fast takeoff leads to a single dominant AI system, a worldwide coup almost starts to look inevitable. Controlling such a system would offer nearly unlimited power, and if that power didn't corrupt the first people to wield it, there would be generations of power-seeking authoritarians waiting in the wings. Meaning for animal advocacy. There is admittedly not a lot of animal advocates can do to harden our movement against a history-ending AI coup. Preventing this kind of concentration of power is a focus of some technical AI alignment and governance researchers. Impact-oriented activists who think having the skills to advance this research should seriously consider pivoting your attention to this for the next few years, even if all you care about is animals. There is, however, some hope for the rest of us. One way history has been unexpectedly kind to us is that effective altruist thinking has been deeply influential among frontier AI researchers and their social networks. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is a lifelong vegetarian. Oh, I did not know that. Who knew that? While the entire leadership of Anthropic are veteran EAs. Dwarkesh Patel, the most popular podcaster among AI researchers, recently raised more than $2 million for FarmKind off of a single episode featuring Lewis Bollard. If faced with the choice between handing off the absolute loyalty of their models to Donald Trump or putting in a backdoor for themselves, we should be so lucky as for them to choose the latter. Indeed, a dictatorship by any of these people could well be more humane than one democratically reflecting the attitudes of humans today. Okay, nice. All right, well, this is looking not so bad then. Maybe the AI dictators will be vegans. This fragile concern for animals among people who may gain unprecedented power is a gift from history. We must protect it and foster it. This is a resilient strategy. The political and technological leaders involved in AI are likely to be influential across a range of scenarios. And in a post-coup scenario, the attitudes of a single well-placed person could be the difference between ending factory farming or locking it in. After all, there's no particular reason that an AI dictator should be pro-factory farming, and opting to replace animal farming may not cost them anything. Cultivating opposition to factory farming in these essential social circles should be a top priority for our movement. If you know anybody who knows anybody, now's a good time to start schmoozing. Bit of hope, right? Yeah, that's right. That's right, Poe. Well, this seems like not impossible. An AI-enabled coup scenario. But maybe that is way less bad than it sounds if, the leaders of said coup are sympathetic to our cause. Damn, all right. Scenario 4 kind of winning so far. And I guess one of the arms of scenario 2 was pretty good as well. Number 5, gradual disempowerment. Slow takeoff, humans removed from competition, alignment mixed. Summary: without a single dramatic takeover by humans or rogue AI, humanity gradually loses any leverage over the world by becoming economically and politically irrelevant. An AI-centered economy has little use for animals, and humans are forced to adopt the most efficient means of survival. Okay. Scenario: the notification said they had 14 days to vacate. Maria read it twice, then showed it to her husband. They're expanding the cooling infrastructure, she said. He nodded. They'd known it was coming eventually. The kids had gotten so used to moving that they now regularly asked when the transport shuttle would return next. The latest plot of land, which they shared with a dozen other families, was surrounded on 3 sides by humming concrete monoliths. Since they'd moved in, these data centers had grown so tall that their shadow was starting to shorten the already narrow growing season. The notification assured them that while the lands allotted in Zone 741H were smaller, each one processed a greenhouse large enough to feed a couple and 1 child. They could trade work on a childless plot for extra food, but how long before they'd be forced to move again? Yeah, he even says meat will be phased out and viewed with horror in the future. Oh, really? In this post? You already read this, Bo? Analysis. In the gradual disempowerment scenario covered at length in a paper by the same name, things would seem at first to have gone very well. AI technology might progress slowly, and we would transition smoothly into a world of superintelligence without a misaligned AI trying to kill us all or an authoritarian dictator seizing power. We would declare the AI alignment mission accomplished before things start to unravel. The problem is that since the dawn of agriculture, humans have secured our place in the economic and political order through our labour. As Paul observed in the New Testament, who is unwilling to work, let him not eat. In a world where AI is best humans at every task, from all forms of labour to political decision-making, the gradual loss of our society may become inevitable. You just looked up on your other phone. Okay, fair. Democracies care about citizens because they need soldiers and taxpayers. Corporations care about workers because they need labour. Markets respond to consumer preferences because consumers have purchasing power. But once AI can substitute for human participation across all these functions, the feedback loops that kept institutions tethered to human welfare start to break down. A state funded primarily by taxing AI-generated wealth has little structural incentive to incorporate democratic input. An economy with no use for human workers nor human customers has less and less reason to delegate precious resources towards their survival. States and economies that sacrifice faster growth to keep humans relevant would eventually be swallowed up by the ones that don't. The authors conclude that no one has a concrete plausible plan for stopping gradual human disempowerment, and methods of aligning individual AI systems with their designers' intentions are not sufficient, because this disempowerment would be global and permanent, and because human flourishing requires substantial resources in global terms, it could plausibly lead to human extinction or similar outcomes. Meaning for animal advocacy. One of the most resource-intensive things about keeping humans alive is feeding them. It takes so much land and water that could otherwise be used for data centers. Competition over land could be one of the main conflicts hastening gradual disempowerment. That's cold comfort for humans, but it could be great news for farmed animals. Even before human disempowerment is complete, a more technocratic world governed by AI could play to our advantage. We know that the movement against factory farming has facts on our side. Not only moral truth, but also resource economics favours plant-based food systems. It's only humans' parochial cultural attachments to animal meat that keep the industry alive. As humans lose political and economic leverages, they may have no choice but to accept the more efficient system preferred by AI technocrats. And it's tentatively hard to imagine AI having its own interest in farming animals, e.g. for research, with anything like the scale and brutality of factory farming. Otherwise, animal advocates would just be one more human faction who entirely lose our political voice. Ironically, this would place us much the same position animals are in currently, with no capacity to organise or resist. As with some other scenarios, the game will be decided before this end state is reached. So this scenario is basically bad for humans but good for animals. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. At the moment, I mean, personally, I kind of consider each day to be a massive net negative. Right, kind of, like regardless of what's happening to humans, there is way, way more farmed animals. And we know that they're being constantly tortured for the most part. So, scenario 5, you know, bad for humans but good for animals. I'm thinking not bad overall. Number 6, industrial collapse, fast takeoff, violent competition, alignment failure. This might be a strongly agree, yeah, based Poe. This might be another bad for humans, good for animals scenario by the looks of it. Summary, conflict triggered by advanced AI leads to a global catastrophe, killing more than 90% of humans. The survivors rebuild industrial society over decades or centuries. With durable access to the right knowledge and techniques, they could skip over factory farming and move directly to advanced meat alternatives. Okay, yeah, sounds, pretty bad for 90% of us. But again, probably good for animals on balance. Industrial collapse, anyone? Scenario. It's pretty good, Ma said with a look of approval, lowering the fork from her face. Poe beamed with pride. Of course, taste was not exactly the top priority, but he'd have a much easier time getting more resources for the project if other villagers were genuinely excited about eating its results. The archive says we could get 500,000 grams of protein per acre within 3 years. That's supposedly 6 times better than corn-fed pigs at scale, dense enough that we could do the entire thing behind the fortifications. Ma nodded as she chewed. Sending out grazing parties had been more and more dangerous lately. Nobody knew why, but there had been an uptick in nomads passing through the region. They were hungry, and most of them would attack on sight. 3 years sounded like a long time, but she had spent 60 years in this settlement, long enough she could remember stories from the elders about before the fall. Okay, she said. What do you need? Analysis. Whether in the case of international AI race spilling over into nuclear war, or the case of a power struggle between humans and AI, extreme conflict may not spell the end of humanity. This section considers scenarios where the remnants of humanity outlast AI. A total nuclear exchange could disable all advanced electrical equipment while leaving a small fraction of humans alive. Indeed, desperate humans might trigger this deliberately to stop an AI takeover from killing us to the last. Otherwise, a rogue AI, warring nations, or an AI-assisted radical extremist group might deploy engineered viruses that take out a similar portion of the population. A wide range of these scenarios would leave a human population too small to sustain industrial civilization in the short term, but large enough to rebuild it in decades or centuries. 80,000 Hours researcher Luisa Rodriguez has shown that even the most dramatic and intentional disasters could hardly be more than 99.999% lethal, leaving in the worst case around 100,000 humans alive scattered over the earth. In the absence of a surviving agent determined to finish the job, that would be enough people to reindustrialize eventually, and even nuclear winter could make some corners of the earth more arable rather than less. Meaning for animal advocacy. After consulting extensive sources, I've determined nuclear winter would be bad for animals. The vast majority of larger animals who do not get incinerated or die of radiation poisoning would starve. This goes for land and sea alike. The next centuries would see relatively more animals like insects and amphibians who reproduce by spawning hundreds of thousands of offspring, most of whom die painfully before adulthood, and fewer like mammals and birds who care for their offspring and have a shot at the kinds of happy lives we like to watch in nature documentaries. In addition to targeting humans, bioweapons might target pigs, chickens, and commonly farmed fishes to cause human starvation. Of course, these animals are already living hellish lives destined for slaughter. Compared to both nuclear winter and the present, the aftermath of biological warfare might not be so bad for most animals. Interesting, okay. So it depends on the type of apocalypse, how bad it would be for animals. In either case, our leverage in this scenario isn't over how animals will fare in the immediate aftermath, but rather over the moral and technological pathways along which our descendants will reorganize themselves. Can we do anything now to make it easier for these survivors to reconstruct an animal-free food system, and even make that system more efficient and scalable than factory farming? This would be a familiar research question to AllFed, the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters, an organization developing dozens of techniques survivors of an industrial collapse could use to produce food. AllFed are not animal advocates, but given the inefficiency of animal farming, it's no surprise that few of their recommendations focus on it. Instead, they've promoted techniques from mushrooms that will grow without sunlight to bacteria that convert natural gas into nutrient slop. I'm up for a bit of nutrient slop. Anybody? Any nutrient slop enjoyers? A pro-animal version of AllFed could devise a plan for passing down animal-free meat in particular. Perhaps it would involve scattering the world with time capsules, preserving process knowledge, and even genetically optimized strains of the crops, yeasts, and animal cell lines used in ethical protein production today. Or perhaps it means researching ways to recreate these industries in a low-tech environment. The large energy demand involved in modern cultivated meat and precision fermentation might make these methods prohibitive. Planning for longer reindustrialization would require us to explore different branches of the tech tree. Low-tech humans scraping by after societal collapse will certainly hunt and farm animals. But as they reindustrialize, they could face new choices. Along with preserving better moral teachings, asking these questions now could stop Civilization 2.0 from repeating the mistake of factory farming in the first place. So what are we thinking number 6? This was industrial collapse. Depends, I guess, is the answer. And a lot of uncertainty, but some things that maybe could be done now to create a better future for animals in this scenario. I'll do 1, maybe 2 more of these. And then I'll call it for now. I might come back later and read the rest, we'll see. Number 7, democratic AI. Slow takeoff, low competition, alignment, democratic process. Summary: AI takes over the productive and technocratic management of society, but leaves decisions about values in the hands of a human-centric democracy. Animal advocacy ends up looking much as it does today, persuade people to treat animals differently based on moral urgency. Sounds pretty far-fetched, but if someone travelled back in time just 10 years ago and tried to explain how the world has turned out to be, yeah. I mean, yeah, the pace of change in this stuff, I'm really not ruling out. None of these scenarios sound that unlikely to me, is the worrying thing. Scenario. The debate had been going on for hours, not in Congress. Congress hadn't met in years, but in the Patel living room where Vijay and his sister Priya were arguing about whether the municipal AI should be allowed to demolish the old slaughterhouse on Elm Street. It's historical, Vijay said. It's a symbol of oppression, Priya said. Their mother, who had been quietly consulting her personal AI assistant, looked up from her tablet. The system says we're the tiebreaker for Ward 12. If we vote to demolish it, it happens tonight. If we don't, they'll turn it into a museum. Vijay groaned. I didn't sign up to be a congressman. Nobody signed up, Priya said. That's the point. Their mother set the tablet down on the coffee table. The vote was due in 45 minutes. Outside, a fleet of construction drones waited in standby mode, hovering motionless over Elm Street like patient vultures. I just think, Vijay said, that we should have more time. His mother laughed. Honey, we have nothing but time. That's the problem. Analysis. This is another clean success story, at least from a human perspective, where we gradually hand off the management of the world aligned to aligned AI stewards. That might sound similar to scenario 2. The difference is that where the AI in number 2 was aligned to an outcome, producing a utopian world according to some set of values defined during handoff, the AI in this scenario is aligned to a process, continually reshaping the world according to democratic input. AI-powered democracy is an enticing proposition. We've already heard about some of the friction working against a future like this. For instance, if only some societies maintain a role for humans in governance, they will struggle to outcompete societies that don't, barring some as yet unforeseen limitation in digital intelligence that makes human input instrumentally useful. But what will the world look like if we solve those frictions in time? If the nations of the world could coordinate, and if the technology worked out in our favour, a democratic utopia could still be within reach. Some AI watchers hope that if the US pulls far ahead in the AI race, thanks to recursive self-improvement, it would use that power to spread a democratic system around the world. Personally, I'm much less optimistic about the beneficence of US foreign policy, but you can decide your own thoughts about that. Say democracy wins out. Humans in this future would not have to work, enjoying lives of leisure with the abundant and democratically distributed AI wealth. Unlike the present, humans in this world would have the free time to form highly reasoned opinions about the important political questions of their day. Indeed, besides enjoying themselves, this would be the only socially important activity available to them. Western societies today might offer a preview of this. American millennials and Gen Z lead the most materially comfortable lives of any human group in history. Yet their politics is defined by populist resentment at least as much as any previous generation, whether against immigrants or billionaires. Gen Z are more likely to vote, join political groups, and participate in protests than previous generations were at their age, providing weak evidence that a significant number of people direct their increased leisure time of a modern life towards politics. This scenario takes that dynamic to its conclusion. It would be as if every human was a member of Congress. And if you want to point out that members of Congress don't actually have time to be informed about the bills they vote on, or even to read them, well, these future humans would each have a trusted AI assistant helping them understand proposed legislation and how it fits with their unique individual worldview, which their assistant would understand deeply. In other words, humans would continue to debate about what kind of world we should try to create, while the AI would set about creating it. Sure, some people would be content playing immersive video games for 18 hours a day and sit the political process out, and they'd effectively recuse themselves. Meaning for animal advocacy. Tentatively, I think a future like this could be great news for animal advocates. Animal rights is exactly the kind of question future humans might spend their time debating. Humans won't have much to contribute when it comes to technical questions about how best to achieve a given outcome. But animal rights, for the most part, is not a technical question. It's a basic moral question. When it comes to social and cultural change, the main challenge for animal advocates, as for any contemporary social movement, is getting people's attention. We know we have the facts and moral truth on our side, but people don't want to hear it. Why not? The answer is complicated, as I learned during the 2 years I spent interviewing meat-eaters for my research at Pax Fauna. One reason is that they know they'd have to change their behaviour and make personal sacrifices, but another is that they feel powerless to make any real difference even if they did go vegan. AI solving clean meat would address the first point. Maybe leading facile lives of leisure, where their only responsibility is forming normative opinions, would solve the second. The animal movement in this future might continue to look more or less like it does now. Outreach, creative content, and pressure campaigns to promote animal-free foods or seek the adoption of higher welfare standards on the way to abolition. It's the scenario we'll consider where our ability to pursue animal advocacy is not cut short. If that's right, there's nothing we should particularly be doing now to prepare for it. All right, I am going to wrap this up now. But we got 3 more of these scenarios that we'll look at and then see how the whole thing comes together. Just to recap what we've read so far with reference to the 10 scenarios listed here. Commoditized intelligence, gradual handoff and moral lock-in, great power showdown, AI-enabled coup, gradual disempowerment, industrial collapse, and democratic AI. I don't know if this first one cut either way in particular. 2 very much depends on the short term or of our ability to influence things. Great power showdown, this is like the war condition and could be really good for alt proteins, basically. AI-enabled coup, far better for animals than it sounds, potentially, particularly with a lot of the pro-AI people, or the people at the cutting edge of AI being quite pro-animal. Gradual disempowerment, again, bad for humans, but good for animals. So too with industrial collapse, basically. And democratic AI, I mean, the one that we just read, again, it kind of depends on which way humans go. But I think on balance, probably a good thing. So we've got 3 more that we'll look at. I'll probably come back and read these later tonight. The digital rights movement, fully automated luxury transhuman space communism, and extinction and succession. All of these seem like they're probably going to be good for animals. So this is very interesting theoretical stuff about the future of AI, but it's not necessarily that far off. We've seen a ton of progress on AI in very recent times. And I have to say, most of these lean pretty positive for animals so far. So I'll come back later tonight and read up those last 3. We are sort of, well, we're about 70% of the way through, aren't we? And we've still got a fair bit to read here. So I'll come back later and read the rest of this article, and we'll look at some other content that we can take a look at as well. But thanks to everyone who joined this evening, and yeah, take care. I'll see you in a few hours. Cheers.